Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon from wherever you're joining from. My name is Tahil Sharma, and I'm the Regional Coordinator for North America at the United Religions Initiative. Our grassroots interfaith network is dedicated to the cause of promoting cultures of peace, justice, and healing, promoting an enduring daily interfaith cooperation, and ending religiously motivated violence. As a network of over 1,100 cooperation circles or member organizations in over 110 countries, we really strive for this ability to be able to learn about the relevant issues that impact you all as grassroots communities and how it impacts the larger structures and cultures that impact society all over the world. And we are currently in the midst of a very pertinent set of conversations related to the development of xenophobia and bigotry for minority communities here in North America. One that has been around historically as a part of the conversation, the forming of this country, to its new developing narratives that have taken place in the last couple of decades. Um, and we found it important, especially in the context of recent events that took place over this weekend, for us to really delve into the need of having real conversations about the impact of the spreading of narratives and mis and disinformation that leads to discrimination and violence towards communities. And we are starting that conversation this week with getting to discuss this in the aspect of the Jewish community, talking about anti-Semitism. Um, as someone who has done interfaith work for the last 12 years, um, anti Semitism has come up as a very pertinent topic in a lot of communities. One that I had learned about from a very young age when I started learning about Judaism through my fellow students and through community members who had experienced this sort of reality of um, being blamed for a lot of things that were not in their hands. I learned from a young age, getting to hear information about conspiracy theories that were often made about Jewish communities that I'm not going to repeat in this moment because I don't think that's right. But getting to learn that that is the context of fear that many people have to live with on a daily basis becomes an important aspect to how communities form, how they may become insulated, and how, unfortunately, this constant fear of having to be in public just as the person as you are, whether you show those perspectives of wearing a specific garb or not, can really impact the way that you're able to navigate in society. I know that as someone who is a practicing Sikh, my community has been attacked on many occasions through our sort of very physical representation of our faith traditions. Many folks from our tradition wear a turban. We know that to be similar for other traditions who have physical garb, but who are also taken a part of a narrative of hatred and vitriol into political and social spaces where people do not feel that we can be humanized, that we should be ostracized in many ways. So I am very thankful that we're having this conversation, especially after months of very fraught emotions and challenging experiences around the United States with what is happening in the Middle East. It is very important for us to navigate this conversation with nuance. It is important for us to consider that many people in this room have many views, and that we should engage this conversation with the community rules of mutual respect and an exchange of information. Remembering to speak from a place of I statements. You can only speak as the expert of yourself and what you do know, and that we want to make this the best exchange between each other as possible. Um, we are starting off with a presentation from a friend and a colleague, one who I have gotten to know for several years now, and sure enough, got to rekindle our friendship once again in more recent days. And I'm very thankful that he agreed to enter this conversation with us, knowing how complex and difficult it can be. But I couldn't think of someone better to come at the last moment to be sort of that person with really a brilliant mind and a great way to facilitate these kinds of conversations. So to quickly, share information about this colleague of mine, Dr. Zack Ritter has spent more than 16 years in higher education across Southern California with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusivity. He is currently a lecturer at UCLA and Cal State Dominguez Hills, teaching courses on equity in higher education and civic engagement service learning capstone courses. He was Associate Dean of Students at CSU Dominguez Hills, helping run the Office of Community Standards, Restorative Justice Department, and Basic Needs Housing and Food Insecurity Program. He actually also runs a consulting business with Maria Mohiuddin, focusing on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in the workplace. And our similar workshop that is taking place on Thursday to discuss Islamophobia is actually going to have a presentation by Mariam. And just to let people know about Zack's background, he received his PhD from UCLA, focusing on East Asian international students, racial stereotypes, and American media promulgation of globalized race, class, and gender hierarchies. I'll be sure to pick up this bio and share it in the chat for you all to read more of the details of it. But I'd like to not spend as much time talking and actually pass it over to Zack directly. Zack, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction. My mom would be so proud of me that I actually did some things. That's exciting. Thank you. Make me sound more important than I am. Everybody, thank you so much for joining me for this difficult conversation or topic. It's Monday. It's like first thing Monday morning, at least here in the States, in the West Coast. I have my prepared, remarks and things like this, but I just want to get kind of a pulse check from the audience. What got you on the screen today? What are you hoping to learn, hear, contribute, talk about today? If any brave souls want to jump in. I'm a teacher, so I can play the waiting game.
I'm a teacher too, Zack, so I'll jump in. A former teacher, which is not a thing. Once you're a teacher, you're always a teacher, right? But I'm just really grateful. My real reason for being here is grateful that this is happening. I serve on the North America Leadership Council for United Religions Initiative. I've been engaged in interfaith and interspiritual work for decades. And I have witnessed the rise of anti-Semitism in recent months. And it reminds me of the rise of Islamophobia that I witnessed following 9/11. And it all just breaks my heart. So thank you, URI, for convening this conversation. And thank you, Zack, for leading it.
Of course. Thanks for being here. Anyone else? Penelope, Felipe, Anna, Angie?
Okay, I'm here for maybe the same reason that Vasu and Nancy are here. I'm with the Arizona Faith Network, and they do lots of work, as you know, in this area. And so I live in Arizona. I'm in Seattle right now with my windows open in case you hear fire trucks going by on a busy street. Honestly, I'm in a couple of current events groups and book groups with predominantly Jewish women. And so this is a conversation that I think I would like to have a better understanding of it.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
I'll say hello, Zack. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Hi.
Hey.
My name is Angie, and I live in Alameda, and I am part of an interfaith coalition group here on the island called the Alameda All Faith Coalition. And I'm a friend of Tahil's. He's been a great support of our congregation, our coalition. We put on every year interfaith dialogue, and we have different people from different religious backgrounds come and talk about their faith, and then open up for people to ask questions. We really are about trying to promote understanding between diverse spiritual perspectives. I'm here for a couple of reasons, probably very similar to a lot of you here. I'm here to learn. I know in our coalition, we do have members who are from the Jewish faith, and we've had sort of a schism in our coalition around the Gaza-Israeli war and how we respond to that as a group individually. And it's caused some pain. We've had some painful conversations about what it means to be critical of the Israeli government and what it means when it crosses a line, when it's, prejudice against a whole segment of people. And so I just want to learn because I want to be able to have more thoughtful conversations. I want to be able to understand more of what my Jewish brothers and sisters are thinking and feeling, and how can I navigate conversations with a greater consciousness of where people are coming from. And so I'm here to listen, learn. I may ask a question, but I'm just wanting to show up and really be a better leader in this group and to hold all of us, whether we're pro this or anti that, to really how do we hold all of that? How do we make space for all of us, and how do we treat each other with respect and just see each other as the precious beings that we are? Like, how do we get to that part, of our human experience? So that's why I'm here, Zach. I'm so looking forward to to being here, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll come in. This is Donna. I am a senior minister for Hope for All Interfaith Community in Fargo, North Dakota. And yeah, I'm here because I would love to be maybe more proficient at holding some of these difficult conversations, especially along the happenings in Gaza. It's a very difficult and fine line to walk when you're in conversation, perhaps with people of different views. So learning to walk that line and maybe perhaps bring people to some kind of maybe not agreement, but some kind of I don't know what to call it. But some kind of understanding, maybe I can put it that way, better understanding of each other's sides. So
Amen. I love it. Thank you for saying that. So maybe we'll do it like this, folks. I'll present some material and then some historical stuff and some framework grounding things. And then we can maybe, if we really want to get into it and be honest and open with each other, we can cut off the recording and we can really get into some back and forth within this group of things that are on people's hearts and on people's minds. And maybe people will feel a little bit more the ability to be honest if it's not being watched by the world. How do you feel about that? Okay, great. So let's start with some basics. And I should say 100% shout out to my colleague, Mariam Mohideen, who is going to be speaking with you on a different day about anti-Semitism. And so we do this workshop together because we really believe that you can't fight one without the other, that there's anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are intertwined throughout history, and for unfortunate reasons we're being pit against each other. But if you look at things like the Great Replacement Theory, which is kind of this neo-Nazi white supremacist idea, they definitely link Muslims and Jews together as doing some type of international cabal against white Christian Americans and Europeans. But we'll get into that. So obviously it's been we'll skip through this stuff because we're not going to do the whole thing today, but there's been a rise on college campuses. I've been a college dean. I work at a college campus around all these isms, right? Anti-Zionism, anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, anti-Semitism, anti-Arab sentiment. And it's tearing everyone apart. And it's causing a lot of strifes. You've seen the encampments. There's been Jewish students in the encampments. There's been Jewish students on the outside of the encampments yelling at Jewish students on the inside of the encampments at different colleges. So it's not clear cut as the media would portray. We've seen at Harvard encampment that Jewish students were doing a Seder for Passover inside the encampment. So I want us to challenge some of these blanket statements that college campuses are extremely anti-Semitic right now, but not Islamophobic right now. I think we can tackle these things together. So let's do a brief history of anti-Semitism, because that's, I think, what people signed up for today. Can everyone see the screen? It's okay? Okay, cool. So I should say that my father was born in a refugee camp in Bavaria. That's where you get BMW, Bavarian Motor Works. And he was born in a displaced persons camp, so like a refugee camp. And he came to America when he was 3 years old and kind of won the lottery and applied to a bunch of different countries, and they got America. In America, he went to Rock Island, Illinois, which is kind of a rural part of Illinois. And there was like low levels of anti-Semitism where people wanted him to convert to Christianity and would always leave like a Bible on the doorstep and things like that. But there was also this interesting veneration of Jewish people as a people of the book. The things that happened in Europe, there's a good book called The Pity of It All, where it chronicles German Jewry, especially, and it shows kind of this like march towards something more progressive from the 1700s to the 1900s, and then the pity of it all, that it all explodes. And this notion of the most civilized country in Europe is actually the most barbaric. But then the interestingness of history, the fastest growing Jewish population in Europe is, yes, Germany. So things do change. Anti-Semitism is Jewish hatred, but the word itself is weird and complicated because a Semite is who? Who's a Semite? Sem or Shem is the son of Noah, right? Like Noah's Ark. And there's some weird theories about Shem was born with aposia, which is a condition where you're born without foreskin. So some think, is this where the foreskin cutting thing comes from? Arabs are Semites. Jews are Semites. Eritreans are Semites. So, you know, folks on the shark fin of Africa are Semites. It's a lot of people. But when we talk about anti-Semitism, we're usually talking about Jews. So Hitler didn't create anti-Semitism. It was bubbling for a long time, and we're going to learn about why. He was actually pretty lazy. He just recycled all the garbage that was floating around in Europe. Okay, so what's the deal with Jews? Where do they come from? So there's a big, obviously, debate right now about indigeneity. Who's indigenous to the land in the Middle East? And even the word Middle East is, yeah, it's a colonial term made by the British because it was east of Europe, and it was the middle because between Saudi Arabia and India, the places that the British were excited to take over, right? So Jews do come from Israel-Palestine area. And if you all are reading your Bible, right, there's different kingdom of David, kingdom of Saul, kingdom of Solomon. And there's Israel in the north and Judea in the south. And, you know, initially it wasn't a monotheistic thing. There was actually two different gods that we don't have time to get into, but it was, you know, Baal and Elohim is different. Anyway, Emperor Titus comes and destroys the Second Temple in 70 AD. And if you recall, the first temple was destroyed in 586 BC by the Babylonians, which are modern day Iraq. And let me start with the Babylonians. That starts with the first diaspora of Jews. So a lot of Jews being taken or going as slaves or as free people to Iraq. And Baghdad was a big Jewish outpost population for a long time. Baghdadi Jews made up a big population in the world, and that was like the center of culture. The Romans in 70 AD come and destroy the temple, which is all is left is the Wailing Wall, right? And then on the Temple Mount is the Dome of the Rock, where Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, supposedly went to heaven. So this is a shared space now. A lot of conflict as well. But the Romans bring Jews to the Roman Empire as slaves and as other things, as business people, and kind of they make their way into what we know as modern Europe. So this is the first type of diaspora into Europe of Jews. Greece as well was a big deal. We don't got much time, so we're fast forward. I'm giving you the highlights and the lowlights of Jewish history here. And then you have the Middle Ages, which didn't go so well for Jewish folks, especially in Europe. Jews fared better in the Arab world under Muslim rule, because right from 711 to 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, Jews fared well under the Muslims in Spain. But something bad happens in 1492 when Columbus sails the ocean blue. He kicks out all the Muslims and the Jews from Spain. And this is the Catholic takeover by Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. And the Inquisition happens, and it's, do you believe in Jesus? Do you not? We're going to burn you at the stake. The Inquisition comes to the quote unquote New World as well, to Brazil. And maybe people know it as Recife. It's in northern Brazil. Jews have to flee the Inquisition in Brazil. They go to Cuba. They're not wanted there. They go to a place called New Amsterdam. And this is 1642. And Peter Stuyvesant, where you get Bedford Stuyvesant in New York, he's the governor of New Amsterdam, and he's the first to allow Jews to come to this new place called New Amsterdam, which we know becomes New York. So these are the first Jews in North America because of the Spanish Inquisition. So during the Middle Ages, Jews are being kicked out of different European states and little fiefdoms for various reasons. One of them is that they killed Jesus, right? This false notion that Jews committed deicide. And this is used as a kind of a bludgeon to always say Jews are bad and need to be exterminated because they killed our Lord. It's false, but it lives on with us. The other thing that people freaked out about, white Christians freaked out about, was blood libel. Again, this one doesn't make sense, but stick with me. You got to make the matzah crackers with Christian baby blood. There's no blood in the matzah cracker, but this is the fiction that is promulgated of why Jews should be ghettoized into, the word ghetto is an Italian word. That's why it has the GH. And it's a city in Italy that means an iron foundry. And Jews were separated from others, from white Christians. And you couldn't have sex with a white Christian. You couldn't marry. You couldn't own land. Interestingly enough, this also was true for Ethiopian Jews. When the Christian king Isaac took over in I think it was the 1400s, Jews were not allowed to own land in Ethiopia either. So Jews have to go into different professions. Well, in Ethiopia, they went into like blacksmithing, which was then seen as wizardry or witchcraft. So there was kind of some hatred towards Ethiopian Jews because they're seen as being involved with wizardry and witchcraft because they're blacksmiths. So I don't know, all these strange stories come about around a minority group. But we see this happening with the different minority groups, like the Freemasons are still to this day are like, it's a secret society. There's a cabal that they want to take over the world. And we'll see this too used against Jews later on. Okay. So they're expelled to different countries, and this promulgates the notion of the quote unquote wandering Jew that has to go from city to city when they get kicked out, and therefore they become business people so that their livelihood could be mobile. Once the state of Israel is created, you also see then a trickling in of anti-Semitism from Europe into the Arab world. And what do I mean? The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is created in Tsarist Russia in 1903, is then promulgated later on throughout the Arab world. And this notion of the blood libel thing, remember I told you about the Christian baby blood and the matzah, which doesn't make any sense, but whatever, that's then promulgated in the Arab world. And so, and this is a big point, the creation of the state of Israel is voted down by all the Arab countries in the United Nations. And it is seen, and we'll get into the history of Israel. I think we're going to have time. Israel-Palestine. It is seen as a move by the Western powers and, Europe, America, to continue a colonial presence in the Middle East by having this kind of Jewish outpost. Because the British own that area for 25-ish years. And we'll get into that. But what's important about this little map here is that there was a lot of Jewish folks in these countries that then had to flee for various reasons, right? There's 56,000 Tunisian Jews. I think that was actually more, 130,000 Iraqi Jews. Iraq is an interesting, complicated story. There's a famous pogrom, killing, right? It's a Russian word for killing. As is the Pale of Settlement. Palais means region in Russian. That's where Jews were forced to live because Catherine the Great kicked them out, expelled them from Russia. And then, as you saw on that last map, Jews were expelled from different places in Europe. So they were only allowed to live in the Palais of Settlement. And that's where a lot of Ashkenazi Jews, Ashkenaz means East Europe, are coming from. So like my family's Polish and Austrian, a lot of Jews were Ukrainian, Belarusian, Romanian, Hungarian, all that Eastern European stuff that kept being fought over between the Prussians and the Russians and the Lithuanians is called the Pale of Settlement. A lot of Arab countries, okay, so Iraq. There's a terrible pogrom called the Farhud. In 1941, the Iraqi government wants to act like Hitler. Some of Arab countries at that time like the strongman politics of Hitler, and they used Jews as the scapegoat also in the Arab world. So 180 Jews are killed in a 2-day period called the Farhud, Farhud, in Iraq. And this is obviously starting a push-pull factor to this new, almost budding place called the Palestinian Mandate. For reasons we may not get into, the British didn't allow Jewish immigration after the late 1930s, and we'll get into that. So some people had to smuggle themselves into Palestine. There's also complicated things in Iraq and Egypt where there are Zionists, and how I'm phrasing Zionist is This is the old way of term of Zionism, which is someone who is fighting for a Israeli state. So there are Zionists in Egypt and Zionists in Iraq that plant bombs. So they are Jews that are planting bombs to kill Jews, to scare Jews to go to this new place, budding place called Israel-Palestine. I know it sounds messed up, and it is, but these are some of the push-pull factors that are happening in the Arab world with Arab Jews. And I think Arab Jews and Ethiopian Jews and Indian Jews and Chinese Jews don't get talked about enough. So I think it's important to kind of focus a little bit on them. And also Yemenite Jews were a big population that immigrated to Israel after it was created in 1948. And we can get into how brown Jews were treated in Ashkenazi Israel, which oftentimes was not good. But that's for a different conversation. Okay. As we said, deicide, the killing of Jesus, blamed on the Jews, but the Romans really killed him. Anti-Semitism in medieval Europe, being blamed for the Black Death. Interestingly enough, Jews died at a lower rate than white Christians because they were ghettoized. They were segregated into other parts of the city. And also cleanliness was different because of issues of like washing one's hands before Shabbat. Also during Passover, getting rid of all your bread and cleaning out all of your kitchen stuff, which some scientists think that maybe the rats didn't come to their houses at the same rate as white Christians because they didn't have the bread, the chumetz. Anti-Semitism in modern Europe, the Great Replacement theory that there's an international cabal where Jews are, this is fiction, but unfortunately created into nonfiction, that there's a secret cabal of Jews that are trying to take over the world, and they are using black and brown bodies to replace and genocide white Christians around the world. This is what we call the Great Replacement theory, or the quote unquote white genocide. And this is promulgated by some extremists in America and Europe and around the world. And it was really promulgated by some authors in the 1970s, a guy named Camus, not that Camus, but a different one. And the Turner Diaries and some other mishigas that we don't have time to get into. Okay. My grandparents were in Auschwitz in the Holocaust. My grandmother was Polish and my grandfather was Viennese, Austrian. And the closer to the empire you were, the more you were seen as an educated Jew, okay? And the empire being the German Empire. So my grandmother, her whole family was murdered. All of 4 sisters, her 2 parents, and she was 14, 13 when she got taken by the Nazis. There was a lot of like, she was a lovely woman, she yelled a lot, and she had a lot of trauma, and she had a lot of pain, and she never went to a therapist, which is unfortunate. A lot of folks from that generation did not. She gets out of Auschwitz in 44, 45, and she comes back to her village, Zalashitsa. And she goes to her house. And her father, before he had been murdered, told her that if anything bad happens, we hid some jewels in the house, and you should go get them. So she knocks on the door, and the neighbors had taken over her house. And they say, it's our house now, go away, dirty Jew. She somehow sneaks into the house in the following days, and she gets the jewels that her father had hidden. And she's kind of with a girlfriend in hiding in her village, Zalashitsa. And then the Catholic Poles start shooting, like random people start shooting Jews that are coming back from Auschwitz and the different concentration camps because they don't want to give back the property that they've stolen. Okay, so this is the stuff that the Hollywood movies don't really show, and it's very disgusting and brutal. And so then she, with the help of apparently a Black American GI, Army guy, and some other people, make her way to the American occupied zone of Germany. And she meets her future husband at a Hanukkah party for Holocaust survivors, and has my father at the age of 18. And then doesn't want to go to the doctor because she still sees Nazis everywhere. And so ironically, she goes to the Catholic nunnery to have my father born. And then the American part comes when she comes to America. One thing that's very important. The capitalist portion of the Nazis, I think, is oftentimes overlooked. If you look at any German company today, unfortunately, they were involved in the Holocaust, usually, not all, usually. Bayer Medicine, right? Bayer aspirin, the medical thing. They made the gas for the gas chambers. It was called IG Farben. BMW, the symbol is a propeller because they made some planes, but they really made the motorcycles for the Nazis. And Mercedes-Benz, the symbol is a propeller because they made the airplanes for the Nazis. And Volkswagen was made for Hitler's birthday in 1935, the Nazi Volkswagen. Ironically, the first car was made by a Jewish guy who was then sent to the concentration camps, somehow survived, came out and sued and got the patent for the first Beetle that was supposed to be as fast as a beetle, as Hitler would say. That's why it's called the Beetle. And he got the patent back. Porsche, Audi, Siemens, Hitler and his Nazi crew were very good at consolidating money and power to build this not only killing machine, but the empire to take over all the different countries. Something that we forget about the horrors of genocide is that people make money off of it. With anti-Semitism, sure, you have to promulgate the hate amongst the people, but there's many people that are making money off the death of others. What do I mean by that? You've seen the Hollywood movies, right? Where they take off the jackets that the Jews are wearing when they come to the concentration camp. They take off the glasses. They rip out their gold teeth, right? They shave off their hair. So all these things, and then they eventually they take their skin and make it into lampshades, and they take the bones and they make it into soap, which is disgusting, I know. The coats, the glasses, and all these things, and the gold teeth are then redistributed by the German Reich back into the Reich for non-Jews. So it's not like there was a capitalist aspect to the National Socialists, the Nazis, and we forget that. I said there was a lot of people making money off of this, and there's a lot of, how do we say, everybody knew what was going on, but people chose not to look. And the famous saying that not all of us are guilty, but all of us are responsible. And so, with that framework, some people are now using that framework towards certain Jews today, talking about genocide and things like this, and blaming sometimes all Jews for this war going on in Gaza, Israel. And we'll get into that. It's very controversial. But some people are asking, does anti-Semitism equal anti-Zionism? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? Critiquing Netanyahu and saying, I don't like his politics. I think he's killing, for every one Hamas person he kills, militant he kills, he's killing 90 innocent people. This is wrong and this should stop. That statement to many is a critique of Israel, but not anti-Semitic. But then in some protests, people are yelling to Jewish folks, go back to Poland. That is anti-Semitic because Poland is where, right, many, almost 6 of the 6 million Jews were killed. And so that's anti-Semitic. We've also seen on college campuses some people online saying all Zionists must die. This is anti-Semitic because calling for the death of someone, even if you don't like their ideology, is tied to Jewishness and would be anti-Semitic. ADL has different definitions of anti-Semitism. The IRA definition is complicated. We can get into that later. The last thing I should say is my grandfather survived the Nazis in Auschwitz, and then he comes to America and, oh, I forgot this part. This is important. He's denied housing in America because no Black folks, no Mexican American folks, and no Jews are allowed because of redlining until 1968, when the Fair Housing Act was passed and the restrictive covenants were lifted. And this is where Karen Brodkin, in her book, How Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, Became White, right? Because Black Jews can't become white. It's just a thing. And brown Jews. This is where some of the modern anti-Semitism also comes in, where it's like this notion of, well, white Jews are just white people, and what are they complaining about? Well, it's more complicated than that. Please read Isabel Wilkerson's book called Caste, where she compares the caste system in India to the caste system in Nazi Germany to the caste system in America. And she chronicles, or you could see the Ava DuVernay new film called Origin. If you like films better, it's a film of the book. She talks about how Nazi Germany copied Jim Crow South. And even Nazi Germany felt that some of the policies towards Black folks in America were too barbaric, and they did not adopt them. But this notion on Jim Crow South, and also, Jim Crow applied to the North too, let's not fool ourselves. A Black person could not marry or have sex with or usually do business with a white person. That went for the same for Jews in Europe. The notion that Black folks oftentimes could not own land, that was also used for Jews in Europe and Romas. And this notion of Hitler's folks, Nazis, studied how we treated Native Americans here and said, that's a brilliant, disgusting idea to concentrate people on a reservation outside of the cities. Aha, let's make the concentration camps in Europe. And they also copied how the British subjugated and killed the Dutch in the Boer Wars in South Africa. So this hate is not just cooked up in a lab in Germany. This is borrowed, studied from America. And even in America, as we know, is one of the homes of eugenics. Buck v. Bell was a famous Supreme Court case where there was a mentally challenged woman, and the Supreme Court said she has to have her tubes tied and she's not allowed to have babies because we don't want these types of babies in our country. And then I'll pause. We know that Walt Disney was most likely part of the American Nazi Party and invited Leni Riefenstahl, when no one else would take her, invited Leni Riefenstahl to the Walt Disney studios. And Leni Riefenstahl was the propaganda filmmaker for Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, who made the famous film Triumph of the Will. So I think we'll stop there because I don't want to take over Mariam's part. I'll leave you on a cliffhanger about how Islamophobia is linked with anti-Semitism. But sneak peek, Edward Said's Orientalism, even Edward Said, who's a Christian American Palestinian, would say that the Orientalism of these people are seen as barbaric and hypersexualized and savage and et cetera, of the Middle East. or MENA or SWANA also includes Jews. So it's not so separated. There are connectivities in the dehumanization of them. I'm going to pause, but I also, I also want to do some of the history, but of Israel. But maybe we'll pause right now and let's any questions so far?
Would this be a good time to stop the recording?
Not yet.
Okay. Sounds good.
I think that more than a question, I have a comment. It's just crazy how we're seeing this being repeated, and I think that I mean, sadly, it's not unexpected, but to see that capitalism is so behind it all, and it's so much about money and possessions, and how is it that I don't know. It just seems also hypocritical in so many ways, you know, like for the US, for most countries that are or have been, you know, colonialist or imperialist, like it's just yeah, I'm so shocked. And then all these brands, you know, like considered luxury brands consume for a lot of money that were primary beneficiaries of concentration camps and the killing and genocide of people is just insane. And we see that now. I mean, the idea of getting all the oil and resources that are in Palestine is the same situation. And so it's just so disgusting because at the same time you see that religion's being used and weaponized to control masses. And I wish we had, you know, just like this little crash course for everyone to see and to realize, like, you know, there's so much behind this, and we can't just blame religion. Religion was a tool for these people to control populations and influence cultures. So super interesting. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much for that, Vasu. Allow me 1 second to comment. This is the complicated nature of this stuff where let's say there's a college student on a college campus that's saying, hey, I don't want my tuition dollars going to a war that I don't believe in, number one. But number two, start calling out the brands, right? I don't want my college investing in Boeing, in Sandia, in Northrop Grumman, in Raytheon that are making the bombs that are killing folks in Palestine, in Gaza. On its face, that is not, in my eyes, an anti-Semitic comment, right? It's a coming from a humanitarian place of I think this is wrong, immoral, and bad, and I don't want this to happen on my dime. And then there's some things get complicated, right? Where I went to the encampment at UCLA because I wanted to see what was going on with my own eyes. And what I saw was very, very copacetic and beautiful and not anti-Semitic from my eyes. Now, I did see an Israeli flag and it said colonizer. And, you know, I could see how that, could be interpreted as anti-Semitic. But people were not promulgating blood libel, they were not calling for the destruction of the state of Israel. There was a heavy critique of the militarization and the killing of now almost 40,000 Gazans. But I did not see a lot of this negativity that I've been seeing in the news. But I could be wrong. Vasu.
Thank you, Zach. I'm Vasubandhu, I'm a Buddhist monk, and it's important for me to learning how to live in harmony with all diversity of religions. So I wonder if there is only any other experiences with other religions between Jews and other religions, like Buddhism, Hinduism. I would like to learn more about that experiences on the relationships. And the other thing is if there is accountability with these companies?
Mm, mm.
Well,
Zach, could I kind of answer one of
please,
the
please, yes, please, yes.
only because um, I forgot to actually start off with a story that I had about a conversation that I had with my mom. My background is Indian. My parents came from India in the 80s. Their exposure to the Jewish community was not actually a thing until they came to the United States, even though there is a very tiny Jewish population in places like Delhi and Mumbai in India. But an interesting question that came up for me in the last 10 months was actually related to, um, what my parents were sort of processing about the events happening in Palestine and Israel. And I kind of asked my mom randomly, like, I know you grew up with religious diversity, but like, you probably didn't know about certain communities because you either didn't meet people because the populations are so small, or you didn't get exposed to them until you were a grown adult working here in the United States. So when it came to learning about the Jewish community, what did you learn? And I shared this story with Zach because it really just shocked my system quite a bit, because she said, "Oh, I went to a Catholic convent school when I was younger, and the nuns told me that the Jews controlled all the money." And this is my mom going through elementary, middle school at a Catholic convent school in India, getting told by nuns that these conspiracy theories that promote anti Semitism were the things that were being fed to students. And this is the idea of, I think, the insidious nature of how we understand this kind of disinformation, right? It's, you hear from Zach, talking about the history of, the misplacement of communities, displacing them in so many different ways, and then being forced into certain positions that only the Jewish community is now, destined to work in, only then to then fill that with conspiracy to say that they are all in that position because of some other arbitrary reason, when it's all just like entrapment and self-fulfilling prophecy that's making this happen. And then that same information gets spread throughout the world to different communities that have no exposure to the tradition or the community, and then it begins to propagate, worse and worse conspiracies from there. And that is such an unfortunate reality that I think we have to navigate, especially where, India currently is experiencing a lot of its own sort of realities with dealing with the weaponization of religion. And you're actually seeing that right now take place, where there is this ongoing conversation about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in the South Asian context, especially when it comes to the issue of Israel and Palestine. There's been this growth of Islamophobia that's happening at the same time, while also propagating this reality of anti-Semitism, but also showing a more pro-Israeli stance politically. And it's really mixing up with people's emotions and confusing them about, like, how I don't know how to navigate this at all. So this is becoming a place where other traditions like Hindus and Buddhists and others who are adjacent to maybe the minority experiences may also be the same ones that are propagating some of the misinformation and disinformation about other communities like Jews and Muslims.
And I should add to that, thank you for that. It's spot on. I guess as a Jewish person, I'm always quick to, I guess the way I was raised was like, don't bring too much attention to yourself. Don't bring too much attention to your Jewishness. And unless someone is really hitting you or calling you some terrible, terrible name, it's not anti-Semitic. And that's my own kind of bias. And so I have to check that sometimes. I went to the supermarket and I saw this man approach an Orthodox Jewish family. And he said, "Oh, excuse me, are you all Jewish?" And the woman said, "Yes." And then he said, "Do you consider yourself Middle Eastern?" And she was blonde, I should say, blonde and white
Do
appearing.
you have any idea or info as to what topic each of these photos is related?
Say it again. Hello, Nancy? Nancy, you're on speaker.
I think she was talking to somebody else and just
Okay,
needs to
that's
be
okay.
muted.
All good. No worries, no worries, no worries. So, do you consider yourself Middle Eastern, is what the man said. And she says, no, I'm American. And then it got weird, right? Because then he goes, well, why do you feel that your people have the right to take over land in the Middle East? And then it kind of hit her like, oh, there's like, whoa, there's like an agenda here. And this guy's holding on to some stuff and he's like taking it out on me. And then she goes, oh, no, I'm not involved in those things. I'm American. I don't know about those things. And she went on with her day, and then the security guard came over and was asking me, what did he look like? And I was like, we're not going to escalate this into something. And I said, he's gone. Don't worry, we're not doing that. But I approached her and I said, how are you doing? And she said, well, I'm shook up because my kids are here and I just wasn't expecting that. And we kind of shared some niceties. And what I'm gathering from this and other experiences that I've seen, unless you are a Jewish person who outright is saying, I am against this war, here's my political ideology, I am against Netanyahu, you are oftentimes seen as suspect, because then you are seen as, are you for this killing of Gazans? Are you, prove yourself of who you are? And so I can see how this is making a lot of people feel threatened, vulnerable, etc., on college campuses and elsewhere. But if you'll allow me, I want to jump into a little bit of Israel-Palestine history, and then we can come back and wrap it up with some conversation. Is that okay with folks? Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Do
Okay.
I need to stop any recording yet, or
No, you're good. You're good. We could keep going live.
cool.
Okay. So, wait, I don't think I shared it. My apologies. Okay. So, okay. Okay, everyone can see? Yeah, it's good. Okay. So just real quick, so folks that are interested, so that we're on the same page. Okay. From 1322 to 1919, it's the Ottoman Empire, which spans from like North Africa, almost to Persia, almost to Vienna. Okay, this is the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire falls in World War I, and the British take over. So the British call it the Palestinian Mandate from 22 to 1947, 48. When they leave India, Pakistan, they also leave British Palestinian Mandate after World War II, because they're broke and they've been assaulted by the Nazis, et cetera, et cetera. There is, how do I put this? There's a claim that Jews, Ashkenazi Jews from Europe don't have a right to be in Israel, et cetera, et cetera. But we know that Jews originated there, were in Europe for a long time in different places. In 1931, there's only 16% Jewish population in the British Palestinian Mandate area. There's a lot of Jews scattered throughout the Ottoman Empire, okay? There's 5 waves of immigration since the 1880s of European Jews to Palestine, because there's pogroms and Russians killing Jews, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there's different fightings between Jews and Palestinians, unfortunately, at this time as well. The Hebron massacre, where hundreds of Jews were killed. But there's also Jews that are killing hundreds of Muslims in different pogroms. But both Muslims and Jews are trying to fight off the colonizer, the British. So the British would call them Muslim terrorists and Jewish terrorists, right? The famous bombing of the King David Hotel, for folks that are aware of that incident by Jewish militants. All right, this one's important, folks. In 1936, there is a Palestinian revolt, Arab, it's called the Great Arab Uprising, and 10% of the Palestinian male population is killed by the British, and people are tortured, and it's really terrible. And the British make a deal, and there's a boycott, divestment, sanction type of activity by the Arabs towards the British at that time. And the British make a deal and say, we're going to cut off Jewish immigration to appease the Muslim and Christian, I should say, because there are a lot of Palestinian Christians at that time. World War II ends, as we talked about, the Holocaust. A lot of Jewish folks are emigrating from Europe to Palestine with difficulty because of this British, just what I told you about the British limiting immigration. In 1948, this is where we start getting the dueling histories. The Nakba, or the Nekba, which is the catastrophe in many Palestinians' eyes, where 750,000 Palestinians are created refugees after 6 months of the declaration of the State of Israel, because the Arab countries around Israel then go to war with Israel because they see it as a continuation of the colonial power. Even though the British leave, they see this as the Americans being and Europeans in the United Nations being a new colonial power in the region. But for many Jews, this is a refugee resettlement place and a returning of a biblical homeland, et cetera, as you know. Okay, this is an important map, right? The Nekba, or some people say the Nakba, means catastrophe in Arabic. And the map to the left is Palestinian refugees fleeing for their lives into different parts of Syria, Jordan, West Bank, Lebanon, Gaza. The map on the right is the original partition of the state of Israel-Palestine. It was supposed to be a two-state solution, that the blue part was supposed to be for mostly Jewish folks, not all, but mostly Jewish folks, and the other part was supposed to be for Muslim and Christian Palestinians. And that Jerusalem was supposed to be a shared international city. That's why it's white. This map lasts for 6 months, and then the other Arab countries around it invade, and the refugee crisis ensues. We studied this map prior, but we also know that a lot of Arab Jews then fled to Israel as this kind of refugee safe haven. So when, certain college students are saying it's a white settler colonial nation, it's complicated, right? There's a lot of brown Arab Jews that are fleeing for their lives to go to this newly created, supposedly safe place for Jews. Okay, this is very important. I want to bring your attention to 1967. This is when Israel, when we talk about an occupation, this is the start of a military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. So prior to that, Gaza was administered and controlled by the Egyptians, and Jordan controlled the West Bank from when the British left to the 1967 war, okay? So within this, we start having the settlements in the West Bank. And what do I mean by that? This is what the West Bank map looks like. And this is where some of the anti-Semitism stems from, that when Bill Clinton and Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat signed this deal, it split up the West Bank into area A, B, C, and gave back some of the major cities to Palestinians, but was seen as building of settlements in the white part, which is not supposed to be built for settlements. It was supposed to be a patrolling area for security by the Israelis. But against international law, I should say, Area A is for the Arabs, Area B is supposed to be shared, and Area C is for Israeli patrol. But against international law, Israel has now built 700,000 settlers are now in the white part of the West Bank, which was supposed to be for Palestinians eventually. All right. So this is where a lot of frustration is taken out around Jews around the world. You know, where all Jews around the world are not voting on this stuff, but are seen as being complicit, unfortunately. I should say that, you know, in 1978, Israel gave back the Sinai Peninsula, right? They owned it for 10 years, or they controlled it for 10 years. And there's a pattern that starts happening where anyone who makes a deal with Israel is then assassinated. So Anwar Sadat of Egypt is assassinated. This is Jimmy Carter. This is Menachem Begin. The terrible Gaza Hamas attacks on October 7th is reminiscent of October 6th, October 7th Yom Kippur War. So there's a symmetry and a studying of history by Hamas. I want to point that out as well. And we won't get into the Iranian Revolution thing right now. That's a whole nother thing. But I want you to know that this Oslo Accord, which ended the first Intifada, is very, very important because many people see this as the death of the left in Israel. Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister of Israel, is assassinated because he makes this deal with Yasser Arafat. And Bill Clinton is trying to save his legacy after the Monica Lewinsky affair. So in the year 2000, he convenes Camp David Accord 2 with the notion to give all of the West Bank back to the Palestinians, as it was supposed to be in the 1947 partition of that I showed you earlier, of two-state solution. Yasser Arafat rejects this because it doesn't have the right of return of Palestinians to the land of Israel proper, and because it doesn't settle Jerusalem issue of being an international city, right? Trump moved the capital to from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, very hotly contested, and it didn't address the checkpoint issue, right? Because to get from, if you're a day laborer, to get from here to Israel proper can take 3 to 4 hours. So Arafat rejects the peace, Oslo 2, and this leads to a lot of stuff that we're dealing with today. And I'll wrap it up. I'll go quick. The second Intifada is much bloodier than the first Intifada, and I should say Hamas was started during the first Intifada in 1987, which is the 20-year anniversary of the military occupation of Israel from 1967. But from 2000 to 2005, many terrible things happened. There's a lot of bus bombings and suicided bombings in Israel proper. And Israel decides to build what some people call a safety wall, and other people call it an apartheid wall, along all of the West Bank. This blue, all this blue is this wall. And Israel then pulls out all of its 9,000 settlements from Gaza in 2005 as a response to the second Intifada. Intifada means uprising or shaking off. And this is a controversial thing because they mean shaking off what they see as the colonizer, okay? There is an election, Hamas wins in Gaza. There is then a civil war between Hamas and the West Bank government, Fatah. Hamas wins that as well. Hamas then is the de facto ruler of Gaza, and Israel says, we extended an olive branch and you responded with a fist. We are now going to blockade you, and anything that comes in and out needs to be inspected by us. And many people see this as a crippling of the Gazan economy. And then the war ensues every about 5 or 6 years between Gaza and Israel. And now we're in the midst of the worst war between those two. And this is where some people are now saying, including George Clooney's wife, Amal, that this is actually a genocide, because a genocide, the destruction of a nation, as the definition of a genocide, not necessarily like Hitler wanting to kill every single Palestinian on the face of the planet, which was Hitler's goal in the end, but a genocide in the destruction of a nation. And the International Criminal Court is then calling for the arresting of Netanyahu and Netanyahu's some in his government, and also calling for the warrant for arrest for Sinwar and Hania, which are some of the top brass of Hamas, saying that Hamas is also guilty for using innocent people as human shields. And as you know, 1,200 people killed, Israelis killed, some Muslim too, right? It wasn't all Jews. And then 253 people kidnapped, and now the ensuing 40,000 Palestinians being killed. And we're still in the midst of this terrible war. So this is where we're at. Maybe now we can turn off the recording and we can talk about what's on people's hearts and minds.